So I just got this keyboard right here, the Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro, and in this video I'm going to talk about my first impressions of it and some things that I've done to set it up and just kind of talk about it. And just for a little bit of context, I have just been switching over from this keyboard, the Moonlander Mark I, and that's just simply because I still have been dealing with arm pain and RSI. And so this keyboard right here, the Advantage 360, I'm hoping it will be the answer to all of my problems. But I don't think I will really know that until several months from now, just because, you need time to get used to keyboards, especially crazy keyboards like this one and the Moonlander. Although I will say that the transition to this keyboard has not been that difficult, and that's entirely because of the Moonlander, and I pretty much took the layout that I had on this keyboard and tried to adjust it for the Kinesis Advantage 360, and I feel like I was able to port my layout from this keyboard to the Advantage 360 pretty seamlessly, and was able to keep a lot of the same layout as I did with this keyboard. And so that has helped tremendously. And even though I've only had this keyboard for a couple days and I've only used it for one full workday so far, my typing speed on it is actually not that bad. I was able to hit 120 words per minute on monkey type. So that's been kind of a nice surprise. I was expecting to take a lot longer to adjust to this keyboard. There was like a very small transition period for me where I started typing on it and it was like I completely forgot how to type, and I just kind of kept going at it, and then just suddenly something just clicked in my brain and I just started flying, and I've felt pretty comfortable with it ever since. And that was really just in the first day of tinkering and playing around with this thing. But since I only have this one camera, I'm going to switch it to a bird's eye view of my desk so that you can look at the keyboard as I play around with it. So my very first impression when I put my hands in the key well for the first time was that, wow, this thing really is comfortable. You hear people say that, but like it's really comfortable. And because it's a new keyboard, I've been doing a lot of typing on it, just trying to practice getting used to it. And when I got the Moonlander and had this for the first couple weeks, like that really aggravated my symptoms that I had with RSI and made it worse at first. But this, I've been typing a lot, and I have to say that from the first day that I got it till now, I feel like things have already been feeling a lot better with the burning sensation that I get down my arm, and just overall, like I feel far less strained than on the Moonlander. But another one of my first impressions is that this thing is kind of big, especially compared to the Moonlander. So just for comparison, if I move those guys out of the way and stick the Moonlander right here, the Moonlander has a much smaller footprint, not only just in like the amount of area that it covers on my desk, but it's also so much thinner than the Kinesis, which just feels really chunky comparatively. So that is one big concern that I have with using this keyboard is I occasionally do go into an office. I mostly work from home, but like once or twice a week, I'll go into an actual office, and I'm a little concerned about having to carry this thing around. It's definitely not going to be as portable. And it also does not have a carrying case like with the Moonlander. I can just throw the two halves of my keyboard into this thing and fold it up, and this fits really nicely inside my backpack. I'm not going to have that with this keyboard, so I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But other than that, the build quality of this thing seems really solid, and I don't have any qualms about that. Something that I've heard a lot about the original Kinesis Advantage 2 keyboard is that when you picked it up, it felt really light and hollow, and this thing does not feel light. I would not call it light. It feels like, it's definitely got some heft to it. Maybe they put in some lead weights or something just to make people stop complaining. Could also be the battery. I guess batteries are sometimes kind of heavy. But the exact model that I got here is the Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro. And the reason why I got the Pro was because I wanted Bluetooth. And that's what this has. It's Bluetooth, which is really nice. And I have my personal computer and my work computer, and I can just quickly switch between the two. So right now I'm connected to my personal computer, and if I hit that, then this little light changes. It's now a blue color, and that tells me that it's connected to my work laptop. And then I can just quickly switch back to my personal laptop. So that's a really nice feature. And then they say that when you power it on, so I'll just turn it off, there's the little switch right here, and it's kind of hard to get to. And I feel like I still have to kind of like peek over the side to figure out where the button is. But you just turn on that little switch, and they say that you always have to turn on the left side and then the right side. And I did try it out, and I turned on just this side and then this side, and started to have some weird behavior. So definitely you got to turn this side on first. Something that I don't really like about this, it seems a little weird. I mean, I guess it's fine, but when you plug it in with the Advantage 360, not the 360 Pro, you plug in one side, and then on the other side you have a cable that goes from this half to this half, or maybe it's probably the other way around. But the point is, you only have one cable from the actual keyboard going to your computer, where with the 360 Pro, you have two separate cables that have to take up two separate ports. And I wish that I could plug in my keyboard with just taking up one port, but it is what it is. And you might say like, oh, well, you know, it's Bluetooth, so you shouldn't have to plug it in that much or that often. To which I would say, well, I'm plugging this in quite a bit actually, because I'm still trying to get used to it. And I'm always, you know, I'm tinkering with the layout. And if it's anything like things were with the Moonlander on this guy, I said in another video that I don't think the year that I used this thing every day, I don't think there was a single week that went by that I didn't make at least one change to the keyboard. And I would say that the majority of the time I made changes to my keyboard on a daily basis. So if it's going to be like that with this keyboard right here, then I expect that I'm going to have to plug this thing in all the time so that I can flash the firmware on the different halves. And I don't know, that might discourage me from playing around with it as much as I did with the Moonlander, but we'll see. Because sometimes if you got to make a change, you got to make a change. Speaking of which, I think my biggest gripe with this keyboard so far is not the keyboard itself, but the software that comes with the keyboard. And that part I have found to be quite lacking. I think the only major complaint I have about the physical keyboard itself is that the keys are not hot swappable. And they explain this on their website that they tried to do that, but just for reliability reasons, they couldn't. Because of the curved key well, they decided that they had to solder in the key switches. So I understand why, but it still sucks because like typing on this thing, I really want to lube these key switches, but I'm afraid to do it because I don't want to break this thing. And as soon as you start pulling out key switches and desoldering stuff, that voids the warranty. So I kind of feel like I'm stuck unless I want to spend another couple $100 just to get lubed key switches. So just for comparison, this right here is the software that I've been using for the Moonlander. It's the Oryx software. Actually not sure where Oryx comes from and how they're affiliated with ZSA, or if it's the same thing. I don't know, but this software has been really great, and it makes it really easy to go and change things on my layout, and it's really pretty painless to flash my keyboard once I do make a change. And that I have found has not been the case with this keyboard right here. So both keyboards have a reset button. On the Moonlander, it's this little guy right here. And while I wouldn't say that it's super easy to get to, especially just because of the inconvenience of having to make sure you have a paper clip handy or something that can fit inside that hole, but compared to the 360 here, the reset switch is like way down inside of there, and it's really hard to get to. And also you have to double tap it, which I think seems kind of, I don't know, that's kind of weird to me. But thankfully, both of these keyboards have a command that you can assign to one of the keys to put the keyboard into bootloader mode. On the Moonlander, that's the reset button. And then on the Kinesis, it's called bootloader. And so if I do that, it's that button right there. You'll see that it starts to flash. And because it's not plugged in, it just exits bootloader mode, which is kind of nice because then I don't get stuck with it trying to flash firmware that when it's not plugged in. But another unique thing about the 360 Pro is that you have to flash both sides of the keyboard individually. So with the Moonlander, when I have both of these halves plugged into each other, I just have to flash it one time. But on this keyboard, I have to plug in this half and load in a file and enter bootloader mode and then flash this half of the keyboard and then do the same thing on this side and put in a separate file to flash the right side of the keyboard. So that's been kind of interesting. There's like a two-step process there. And also something that I did not realize when I got this model, because like I said, I just wanted to get this model because of the Bluetooth, but the 360 Pro is unlike, I think, any of the other keyboards. And I'm not an expert on the Kinesis Advantage keyboard lineup, but from what I understand, all of the other Kinesis Advantage 2 keyboards and the Kinesis Advantage 360 have a button that you can push to swap keys pretty much on the fly, where with the 360 Pro, it does not have that. Let's just actually go to the website. So looking right here on the website under the FAQ, how do I remap a key? It says the Advantage 360 Pro does not support onboard programming and is designed for power users only. And thankfully, I would consider myself a power user. It seems kind of weird to say that, but like I at least have the ability or experience with being a programmer to know how I can dive into the documentation and figure out how this keyboard works. If you don't have that kind of background, then this thing I think will be a complete pain, or would be a complete pain to figure out how to program it the way that you want to program it. And I have to say that the documentation on how to do this was not straightforward, and it was actually quite frustrating. So there's the user manual, which I looked through, and it gives you like a kind of more like a starting guide, as well as just a bunch of gibberish. Like, this is, not a medical advice, and it's not going to cure all of your RSI stuff, and just, gives you like guidelines for your using your thumbs or, whatever. But down in the good stuff, the meaty part, it talks about how you actually customize your keyboard. And the way that you do this is, like, I would not call this a good user experience, but they have you go to this GitHub repository and just copy that. Let's go to it. And then you just fork the repository. I've already forked it, so I guess we'll go take a look at mine. And then once you're over here, you can make changes to the config files in here, and then you push those changes up to the repository. And this is what I currently have. And so I have some issues with how this works. So first of all, I'm not a fan of having to come in here and write code to program my keyboard the way that I want to. And they do have the GUI right here. However, I don't know how this works. And so if someone in the comments, if you know how to solve this problem that I'm having, then please let me know. But it seems like when I make changes to this, it does not reflect those changes on the layout here. And I'm pretty sure it's because of this keymap.json file, which is probably what the website is using to figure out like what keys to display on here. And when I make changes to the layout here on with the GUI and then click the commit changes button, it seems to update the keymap.json file right here and keeps things in sync with the this keymap file right here. But if you edit this file directly, it does not seem to keep this file in sync during the build process, which I am finding to be really frustrating, because as soon as you go and make a custom change that doesn't use the GUI, it pretty much makes the GUI completely useless. And once again, I would be very happy to be wrong about this, and there's just some like little trick or secret that I'm not aware of where I can update this file right here based off of the custom changes that I make to this file. And if there is and you know about it, please let me know. But as of right now, this seems like a massive shortcoming to the software and just the overall experience of using this keyboard and configuring it to meet my specific needs. And another thing that has been kind of frustrating is the way that they tell you to do this in the user manual is you make changes to your keyboard, and then if you either push directly to the repository or you are on this website and you make a change and you click the commit changes button right here, it pushes a commit to the repository and it kicks off a build process using GitHub Actions. And once the action is finished running, then it'll create this little firmware file right here, and you just click it and download it. And then when you open it up, you'll have this left and right.uf2 files. And then you flash the two halves of your keyboard where you put this one on the left half and this one on the right half. But that is a very slow process. And that's because every time you create a new build, it takes anywhere from, I've been seeing like here, this is 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And this one's 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes. So it's anywhere between like 2.5 to 3.5 minutes of sitting there waiting for your thing to build so that you can test out a new change that you made to your keyboard. And even though, 3 minutes doesn't sound like a lot of time, it is a lot of time when you make a change and you realize, oh, I forgot to do this one thing, or oops, I put that on the wrong key, which is very easy to do when you're working with a file like this and you just have a list of bindings and you're not sure exactly which binding goes to which key, especially in the center section right here. I'm still not sure which one of these keys corresponds to the keys here on the thumb pad. And I even came and I created this test layer right here where it just spits out like numbers and letters depending on which key I'm pressing on the different rows. And these top rows, they make sense. I did see that going from this key all the way across the very bottom of the thumb cluster and then across the side all correspond to like one layer, like this bottom layer right here. But there's really weird stuff when I'm looking at these two middle layers right here and dealing with these keys right here on the thumb cluster. I can't figure out like which keys they correspond to when looking at the code right here. So I just need to do some more investigation, and you know what? It's probably here in the user manual, I bet. So yeah, I'll just have to, I guess, look more into that. But I got a little sidetracked there. Point is that I was trying to make is waiting the 3 minutes for this to build is kind of frustrating. Luckily though, I understand how Docker works and I'm comfortable with using Docker, and this thing has a Docker file in it. So if I switch over here to my terminal, I'm looking at the code right here that we were just staring at in GitHub. So I just cloned the repository that I had in GitHub and I'm looking at the same code right here. And let's say that I want to make a change. So I did decide to try and put the ampersand key right here. And when I was using the Moonlander, wrong half. On the Moonlander, I had the ampersand key on this side right here on this key. But I decided to try and move it over here just because this is the same side that I have all my other symbols. But I realized that I still sometimes want to use the command key right here when I have this layer active. And so that doesn't really work. So I've decided that I should probably move it back over here to this key. And so coming back over here, I'm gonna come and change this KP ampersand, and KP just stands for key press. I'm going to change that to trans for transparent, so it'll just use whatever key is on the layer below it, which in this case is my default layer, and we'll just default to using left command. And then I need to figure out where my N key is, which is right here. So we'll just highlight that and put in the ampersand key. And then I will save that change and come down into a terminal. And this part is actually pretty easy. If we look in this Docker file, it just has some stuff in here. It runs this West program to do I don't know what, but if we look inside the make file, we can see that the make file uses Docker, it runs a Docker build command, and it attaches these volumes right here, and that's how the Docker container gets access to the config files that you have inside of here. And then it runs a build, and when it's finished, it spits out those build files in this firmware folder right here. So I have a bunch of files in here already. So just to show how this thing works, I'm just gonna blow that away, and then I'm gonna make that folder again. So now my firmware folder is completely empty, and if I come down here and just run make, then it'll kick off the Docker build command and build the keyboard files that I need to flash this thing. And even though this does take some time, you know, it's not instant, it's not as fast as the Moonlander for sure, but it's sure a lot faster than waiting for that GitHub action to complete. So we can see here in the terminal that that command took 23 seconds. And depending on what changes you make, it seems like it's able to cache some stuff. And so on some builds, this goes really quickly, and other times it takes a little longer. But overall, it's a lot faster than waiting for the GitHub action to complete if you run it inside GitHub. But now I will just open the firmware folder, and I have these two files right here. So now what I'm going to do is I will go ahead and plug in this side of my keyboard. I always start with the left side. I guess you don't technically have to, but I guess that's just what I'm doing. So just real quick, this is me from the future. And since recording this, I have realized that it's actually easier to start by flashing the right side of the keyboard and then flashing the left side. Just wanted to interject that real quick. And then I'm gonna hit that key for the bootloader key, which is on this layer and this key right here. And because it's plugged in, when it enters bootloader mode, it stays right there until I drag and drop a file onto this keyboard, which currently is mounted as an external drive. So if I just take the left file and drag and drop it into there, you see that this flashes and it does its thing, and now it's good to go. So I'll unplug the side and plug in the right side, and then the same thing, I'm gonna enter bootloader mode on this guy, and now this showed up as an external drive, and I'll take the right side and drag and drop it into there, and you'll see that it flashes and does its thing, and now everything is flashed. So if I come back over here to my text editor and I'll just start typing. So the key that I tried to change was this one right here. And when I go into layer 1, if I push this, it should be the ampersand, and yes, and now it is. And if I hit this key while in layer 1, it should not do anything, and it does not. So that worked. That's how I've been flashing the keyboard and making changes to it. It's not nearly as nice as being able to do this through the web browser like you can with the Moonlander, but doing it this way and building things locally is a lot faster, and I think a better experience than trying to do it through GitHub Actions. But just a couple other really quick things. If you're inside NeoVim, you can run this command, this set syntax equals DTS. And yes, it was DTS. There's these other files in here. There's a DTSI, and there's also just a .dts, this file extension. And if you use the same syntax highlighting inside the files with the .keymap extension, it makes it a little easier to read. But when first coming in here and trying to decipher what all of these things meant, all these different symbols, I guess these are like commands or behaviors maybe. The ampersand KP, it's for key press. There's trans for transparent. We've already talked about that. Also none, this just makes it the key do absolutely nothing. There's the bootloader, which should not be confused if you're coming from the Moonlander. Should not be confused with reset. There is a reset command or behavior. I think I'm saying that right, but I'm not sure. But this thing is different than bootloader. I believe from the documentation it says that reset actually puts the keyboard back in its factory setting. So go with bootloader if you're trying to just flash the keyboard. And then there's other behaviors like this to Colmac. So this just takes me to my Colmac layer, and this thing right here is defined up here. So I've actually defined all these different layers so that instead of just using numbers, I can use a human readable string to remind me what layer each number corresponds to. So my keypad I have right here, and this uses a toggle, and so toggle just toggles on the keypad. So like if I come up here, this button right here should toggle on the keypad. So if I hit that, then now I'm in keypad mode. And if I toggle it back off, then I just go back into my normal mode on layer 0, or the default layer. And there's also momentary. So that's what I use for this key right here. And I only want the symbols layer active while I am holding down this key right here. And that's because otherwise there's always some kind of delay with switching to the layer, and I don't want that. I just want to be able to immediately switch between that layer and go back out of that layer very quickly. So that's what MO is for, is momentary. And I guess we did look at the to behavior, and this just takes you directly to that layer. So for Colmac, I do that, and now I'm inside Colmac, and I get really confused with where my H, J, K, and L are to move around NeoVim. But yeah, that's the to behavior. And yeah, there's a bunch of other stuff in the documentation, which the documentation really is, I don't know, like it's not terrible, but it's not great. All the documentation is there, but when I came in here, I was trying to figure stuff out. Like I was pretty confused until I started figuring out like how to do the stuff that I wanted to do. But under behaviors, you can see all the different behaviors that you can use, like the key press and the different layers. So being able to do the momentary layer, layer tap, two layer, toggle layer, and conditional layers. This actually sounds really interesting. I'll have to check that out. And you can do all the stuff, the same stuff that you can do with the Moonlander. You just have to program it unless you exclusively use the web GUI. But I think if you have this keyboard, the 360 Pro, then I don't see how you can get away with not using the GUI. I think you'll kind of have to go and program stuff yourself, because like I said in the beginning, all it takes is making one manual change to the code that you have for your configuration in this file right here, and it seems to get out of sync with the keymap.json, and that makes the GUI completely useless. And if I haven't stressed it enough, I feel like this is a glaring blind sight with this keyboard and the software surrounding using this keyboard. And really has just been a huge disappointment. But there's just been like other little things, like I was just too stupid to figure out how to create the like hyper key and mech keys, which hyper is the combination of control, option, or alt, shift, and command, and meh is just shift, control, and option. And also one of the apps that I use on my Mac is called Amethyst, and it's a window tiling manager for Mac OS, and it uses a prefix, which is alt and shift. And so like trying to figure out how to do that, like it took me a while. It was not just super obvious, which I guess if you want to know how I did that, it was with this right here. So basically you can do this LS, that's for left shift, and then you surround it with parentheses to say like, I want to push this modifier with this other modifier or this other key. And so inside here, this is for left control and left alt. And then inside of here is left command. And I did the same thing with meh. And then I also put the prefix in here for Amethyst, although I don't know where I put that. Right here. So I guess I didn't create do a define thing for the alias that I have with Amethyst, but that's how I did it right there. And like I said, it's in the documentation, if you like come over here and let's see, modifiers, you can see that there's just left shift, L shift, LSHFT, and then this one right here, LS with parentheses to put in some other code. And so like it's here in the documentation, it's just not clear how to do it. I don't remember how I finally figured this out. I think I found some other person's GitHub repository with their configuration and just came across them doing this with the LS parenthesis or LC parenthesis or LA parenthesis. And that's how I figured that out. But it was not obvious. Not even ChatGPT knew the answer. And so, yeah, like this documentation is probably really helpful if you are very familiar with the ZMK firmware. But if you're someone who's brand new coming into this completely blind, I hadn't even heard of ZMK before I got this keyboard out and started playing around with it, then yeah, like it's not been like the easiest transition. And I expect that I'm still going to run into issues while I'm trying to figure out how to get the most out of this keyboard. And it's just going to be another like piece of the learning curve that I have to deal with, where with the Moonlander, like that part was just completely not an issue. The learning curve was using the keyboard itself and getting used to the thumb cluster and figuring out where I wanted to use my layers and what stuff to put on those layers. Like that was the problem that I had to solve and learn with this keyboard. But with this keyboard, thankfully, I was already used to a thumb cluster, and so it hasn't been as much of an issue. And I already had a layout with this that I was able to pretty much replicate on the Kinesis. But if I hadn't had that background and I wasn't already used to it, I didn't already have my own layout that I was comfortable with and worked for me, this thing would be completely overwhelming. But yeah, this thing, I'm gonna give it a couple months and see how I feel about it then, and maybe it'll just be one of those things where, you know, this my love for it grows over time, and yeah, we'll see. But if it wasn't for just how comfortable this keywell felt and how I'm already feeling improvements to the RSI problems that I have with my arms. If it was not for that, I would be sticking with the Moonlander. Like this keyboard, I have a huge appreciation for it after switching to the Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro. And I honestly wish I could just stick with this keyboard, but that's not the case. I need to figure out how to be able to type comfortably and not be in pain every day, all day. And I'm kind of feeling like this keyboard right here is going to be the answer to that. But unfortunately, that means leaving behind some things that I really like about this keyboard and embracing some things that I don't really love about the software when it comes to this board. Oh, also, did I mention that this has a tenting feature as well? It only has 3 different positions. And I don't know if I'll really use it, but I guess I should probably throw that in there. But overall, the keyboard is great. It feels super comfortable. The build quality feels really good. The user experience with the software could really use some improvements. And with that, I am about to have my first work meeting of the day, so I gotta get going, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.